housekeeping. Is there still more people coming in, Isabella, or is that pretty much it? Right. How many name stickers are still left? Quite a few, yeah. With the rainy weather, sometimes people get a bit delayed as well, don't they? 28. Yeah. Okay.
Mary, the door's locked. Do you want to open it?
No, I think. Does everyone understand? We've got signs up on the door, but basically when we start and end the day, you can come in through the front entryway that you probably use to come in. But when we're speaking, when we're presenting, there's quite a noise in that front door sometimes. It sort of squeaks and moans. So if you could use the side door, can everyone see where I'm pointing? Which is a quieter door. If someone can just check it's unlocked. Has anyone checked it this morning? And there's a little garden here. I know because it's raining, you probably don't want to hang out in there. Yeah, lovely, thank you. And then there's a side gate there that you can go through. Of course, if you need to use the toilets during the presentation, you're welcome to, and they are just off the foyer that you came through. But just if you could refrain from using that big front door while we're presenting, otherwise it's just interruptive for everyone else who's listening. Yeah. All right. Did everyone park okay? Those of you who drove? Anna, I think, was out there helping everyone get a space. Just a note on the parking, no one can stay parking overnight. We need to come out and I need to lock the barrier at the end of the talk this afternoon. So we'll be doing a few things to pack up in here anyway, so you'll have a little bit of time to get out, but there will be a point where everyone must have left. Just looking at my little list. Okay, we should say welcome. Welcome everyone. Nice to see lots of you again and to see some people we haven't seen before.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. The weather has really been very British, hasn't it? Yeah. It's quite the contrast from Portugal last weekend, where we were sweltering in a little yurt, sweating bucket. So, yeah. Today we're going to finish at 4. We'll have a number of breaks throughout for bathroom breaks and so on. We'll have one main break in the middle of the day, which will probably be about a half an hour, probably at about 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. We'll see how we're going. And then, of course, you're welcome to use the little garden here, but it's probably going to be a bit damp. So we'll just be in here. Yeah. If you could please respect the space and put your litter away, obviously, and those kinds of things.
There's bins up to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure if the front door is locked yet.
Okay.
I found if we leave the left-hand door open, people can just walk straight in and out. And it's not raining very heavily, so we could actually leave the left-hand open if somebody could do that for us.
Yeah, it's just going to be a bit noisy though. I prefer it if we use
if it's left open, people can just go in and out without having to close it. That's all.
I'm not sure what you mean, John.
If you pull it this direction,
no,
it stays
sorry.
open.
So what was your name there? I can't read it from here. Yeah. Adriana. Can you please pull it back in towards us and it will stay open, Jay is saying.
Yeah.
In which case you can use that door however much you
but
want.
don't close it.
Yeah, just don't close it. Yeah, so pull it all the way in.
Keep going.
Keep coming, keep coming.
Keep going. Open it this way.
Open it this way.
Yeah. Open it all the way. All the way. Yeah. That's it.
It's all right, I took a while to catch up as well. Yeah. Okay, so now use it.
Yeah, it's not raining very heavily, is it? So.
And it's fresh air.
Yeah.
Is anyone cold? No one's cold once we're all in here.
It's summer in England. Why wouldn't you go?
Okay, who would like to volunteer to be a mic runner? Elsa? Anybody else? Yeah, thank you. All right, so Bex and Elsa are going to be your mic runners. You need to choose either a side or a front and back of the room. So how are you going to do it, girls?
I'll do the front.
You do the front? Yeah. So you probably need to position yourself there behind. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Oh, actually, before you take it, Elsa.
Yeah. Mary has
I
to
forgot.
give some instructions.
Yes. So please use the microphone when you're speaking. That's going to help us with the recording, but also help everyone else to hear what you say. When you use the microphone, place it on your chin and your chest and speak. That just means there's some consistency in the way that you're using it, because a lot of times when we get anxious or excited, we move the mic around. If you always have it on your chin and your chest, it's going to be in the right position. Okay? Okay. That's all my notices.
That's all the notices. There you go. We're swapping. Okay. Yeah, so as Mary said, we've been already travelling for 6 weeks, is it? Already?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we went to Belgium first, and then to Austria next, and then to Portugal after that. And in the entire time, Mary and I haven't had a lot of sleep. So we're quite sleep deprived, actually. So we'll see how we go today in terms of, if I fall asleep on you while I'm presenting, I need to go home, probably. I don't think that's ever happened.
No. If you all go to sleep, I'm going to be very jealous. Sleep to me is a long, distant memory.
Yeah, that's right. We've been finding that everywhere we've stayed, there's been a lot of noises around us, and that's why we haven't had a lot of sleep. So.
And you know how you sort of adjust to one set of noises, but then you move, and then it's a different set of noises.
Yeah. So in Belgium, it was church bells and jets. In Austria, it was an excavator right next to our bedroom. And then here it's road noise. We're finding it hard to get used to. We live in the bush in Australia, so there isn't any road noise. And all we hear is nature noises at home, and so we're quite used to that, but not much used to this very heavy noise environment that it seems to exist in Europe. I don't know how you deal with it, to be frank. It feels quite oppressive at times. And so there's so much noise going on around. There's no peace and quiet, no time to really meditate or feel, or just a lot of pressure in terms of the noise in particular. So that we're finding that interesting in our trip to do with that. It didn't feel like that the last time we were travelling, so before COVID. After COVID, it seems a lot more intense for some reason.
Maybe we're just more sensitive.
Yeah, maybe. And so what we've been doing is travelling around talking about, mostly relationship with God. We've been talking about that as our priority, having a relationship with God. And also about sort of developing that relationship, receiving God's love, those kind of things. But we've been finding as we've been travelling that there's real issues that most of the audiences have had with regard to understanding sin itself and the relationship between a person's sin and their ability to receive love from God. So we've been sort of finding that for the most part there's not a lot of understanding of what a sin is and God's laws and how refined they are. And we've also been finding that for most people there's quite a lot of disregard of God's laws in preference to their own laws. And so if any of you have seen the presentations we've already done, I think they're up on different sites.
Various sites.
We need to list those sites later.
Yeah.
You've made a list.
Who hasn't seen anything we've presented on this trip so far? Anybody? Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, just a few.
Yeah, so our intention for England is we want to start a subject today, and then we're going to continue that subject tomorrow, and then those of us who will join us down at Dagenham, down the south, will be continuing the same subject for those 3 days too. So that's the general thing we'll be doing over the next sort of 5 days. So when I say 5 days, it's today and tomorrow, and then of course we start down at Dagenham, I think on Friday, this coming Friday. Yeah. So we're hoping to sort of address some of the issues relating to God's laws, sin, the consequences of sin. But we've been handling a lot of our talks a bit differently on our trip, particularly we started doing this in Portugal because we found that the first talk in Portugal that we did was very spirit influenced along a very Buddhist intellectual way, and that meant that it was very hard to reach anybody with their feelings, because there was this large amount of intellectual spirits who came along. And so Mary and I had to talk with them during the week actually to try to help some of those spirits, which we did do, but about half of them actually started to become more emotional, and so that was really good, and they started to feel about God and law, because they didn't actually believe there were any laws really. Their concept was that it didn't matter what they believed. As long as they were just kind people, it didn't matter what they believed. And it's a very common belief on earth as well. And so once we talked about the fact that beliefs matter, some of those spirits moved on. And when I say some, we didn't have a lot of spirits in comparison to what we would normally have at a group. You know, in Belgium, I think we had about 12 million spirits in Belgium, about 6 million in Austria who were there with us. In Portugal, we only had about 500,000 to 600,000 spirits, which is quite unusual for our groups. And so half of them were Buddhist spirits who we then tried to reason with and talk to during the week. And we managed to have a good discussion with them, and some of them sort of moved forward and progressed. Others felt very annoyed with us as a result, and so got pretty angry with us. And so it was a very interesting second group where we had 60 or 70 people come, and then by the end of the day, almost half of the people left, I suppose, wasn't it? 40% probably. And then we could have some good discussions actually. So we had some great discussions in the second group of Portugal about the subjects we're going to talk about with you today, some of the subjects. So let's look at what we're going to do. So the general discussion is going to be that, God's standard of love. And we sort of began this subject in Portugal because we felt that most people were still measuring everything by their own standards, and that applying your own standards to life, while it may seem attractive, at the end of the day it results in a lot of sin being engaged, and then a lot of pain and suffering as a result of that sin. So because we're not having God's standards with the way that we love, we have our own standards. Often what we think is love is not love. And so we wanted to sort of stay on this theme, which we started in Portugal, and we wanted to continue it. But in Portugal, we sort of got a bit waylaid, as we often do, with questions and so forth. And so a lot of times we were more focused upon subjects like God, whether God exists and other things like that, and generally God's character and God's nature, God's personality, things like that. And then we talked a bit more about things like relating to God, but also to the human soul. So we had to cover things like, how the conscience works. So the conscience being an apparatus that you have available that allows you to hear truth from God. And so we had to talk about the human soul, how it was designed, how the bodies work and all of those things, because there were a number of people there that have never heard divine truth at all before. So we covered those subjects, but we didn't really cover the subjects we wanted to get to, because those subjects we've covered before, of course. Not that they're not important, of course, because they're the most important things, but we wanted to get to subjects relating to God's law. So if we just draw that now, we talked a bit about how God's law creates a framework that is basically the framework of how the whole universe operates. So this framework is imposed upon everything in the entire universe. So all the mathematics and science behind how the universe operates are all laws that God created to define how the universe operates physically. But also, we started talking about other aspects of how things operate. So I'll just put those on the side here, because I want to fill up this board eventually. So we wanted to talk about how it affects the human in particular in the physical way in which we live. So, you know, the kind of things that happen to your body, for example, and those kind of things. We wanted to raise how these laws affect you sexually, so how your sexual life is impacted by these laws. We wanted to focus a bit also on how the emotions there's laws that govern the flow of emotion. There's mass that define every emotion that you have, and there's laws that measure those emotions as to whether they're harmonious with love or not. And then there's things that happen to the soul if they're harmonious to love, and then things that happen that are not, when they're not harmonious. And then, of course, the spiritual aspect of your life, which includes a lot of your spiritual beliefs and things like that. So it sort of includes, just includes things like whether you believe in things like, and what you believe in, and how things that, if you believe in things that are out of harmony with love and truth, those beliefs will harm you. And that there are reasons why those beliefs do harm you. There's a common concept on earth that we can believe anything, it doesn't really matter as long as we're sort of kind and loving. But that's actually not true. There's many people who we've seen in the spirit world over 2,000 years of seeing them arrive in the spirit world, where their beliefs have had a huge impact on what happened to them after they passed. And so beliefs do play a large part. In fact, what you eventually find is that this sort of hierarchy, if you like, of laws being imposed upon you as an individual, the spiritual ones are the highest. And therefore, when you live out of harmony with spiritual law, you'll find that the penalty is the highest. And then as you step down, you'll find, so that the lowest penalties are applying to the physical, and the highest penalties are applying to the spiritual. And so we'll give examples of this maybe over the next few days. But these areas of your life are all areas that God's laws will define what happens in your life. So what God's law does is it creates a framework not only for the universe, so mathematically the universe is defined, all the framework of how the universe works, all the maths and science involved in how that functions is all determined by God's laws, but also how you interface with the universe. So what happens to you while you're living in this universe. And remember, the earth life is just a small portion of your life in this universe. So after you pass, you'll have your earth body, your physical body will be gone, and then your spirit body is what will be engaged in terms of your life. And that spirit body has laws also physically governing it and how it works, but also these other laws still apply to you in your spirit form. So it's very important to understand initially that laws, God's law, really define God's standard of love. So every time God has set up a law, it's because he has a standard that he wants to uphold. And whether that standard is physical, sexual, emotional, or spiritual, the law will define what the standard is. And any time you go against that standard, there will be a penalty, and we'll look at what that is. And any time you live in harmony with that standard, there will be a reward. And it's quite simple in terms of understanding. So God's law is one of the topics we'd like to talk about with you over the next 2 days, and the next 5 really, while we're here in England.
And Jay, I know you wanted to relate this to God's love as well. And
so every one of God's laws is really God imposing his standard of love on the universe. So you could say the law is a standard of love that the law enforces in the universe. And every time there is an action taken by a human, because remember, humans are given free will. So the gift of free will means that you're allowed to choose to uphold the law, or you can also choose to work against it. You can do one or the other things. Now, when you choose to uphold the law, you are really choosing God's standard of love. But when you choose to go against the law, you're really saying, I don't want to live by God's standard of love. I want to live by my own standard of love instead. That's really what we're doing when we use our free will to choose the law one way or the other. So we choose to live in harmony with the law. We're upholding God's standard of love. We choose to live in disharmony with the law. We are now really working against God's standard of love. That makes sense? So
God's laws are there to educate us about love as well, aren't they?
That's
so
right.
They're basically, this framework is designed to help us learn when we don't yet have a relationship with God, when we're hitting the mark of love and when we're missing the mark of love. Many times we have our own definition of love which needs correction, and all the pain and suffering in our life is really coming from those false definitions.
Yeah. So we introduced in some of the other groups the concept of a target and, shooting an arrow against a target. And when you hit the bullseye, imagine you're shooting an arrow towards the bullseye, you could say it was a perfect shot, couldn't you? Like it was a great shot because it's hit the target that you're aiming for. So whenever we don't hit the target of God's standard of love, we are sinning. In fact, that is the definition of sin. To not hit the target of perfect love is sin. Now, a lot of people on earth have this sort of belief that it's impossible for a human to meet the target of perfect love. And that's not actually true. There's this concept on earth that has been developed over thousands of years now that humans were somehow created imperfect. And as a result of our imperfection, we always feel inclined towards breaking law. That's our intention, to break law. And so there is this feeling amongst humans generally that it's impossible to actually uphold God's laws, right? But that's not actually true. It is actually possible to uphold God's laws. In fact, not only possible, it's beneficial to uphold God's laws as well. It's going to be beneficial to your life. It's going to be the best way to live your life with the least amount of problems. In fact, if you uphold God's law perfectly, you will actually have no problems except the problems that other people cause. So you have no problems that you cause in your own life. It will just be problems that other people who are not upholding the law cause to you. And of course, if you're upholding the standard of love, you will forgive them for it as well, right? So you won't be all angry and bitter and twisted that they're not doing it either. So when it comes to happiness, meeting the law is the most important thing. Now, if God's law is defining the structure of the universe, then as we said, when we are not upholding God's standard of love, or you could say not upholding God's law, we are fundamentally sinning. So let's draw that. Bad red, good blue. Right? So sin. So we're sinning. Now, the law has a response to sin, just as the law has a response to being loving. The law's response to being loving is reward. The law's response to sin is a process that you need to go through to correct. So that's the law's response. So you could say the first thing that happens when we sin, another not very nice thing, is we have some pain and suffering. Pain being sort of an instant thing that occurs once you break a law, and suffering being a long-term thing that if you just continue to break the law over and over again, you'll end up suffering as a result of it. So you end up either with pain, which is that instant sort of response to the law, or some long-term suffering when you sin. Now, obviously God doesn't want you to live in pain and suffering. He'd never created you to live in pain and suffering. He wants you to have a happy, joyful life without pain and suffering. In fact, God's true desire for all humans is to live in bliss, right? So that's his real desire. But he also knows that every time you break the loving standard, pain and suffering is going to be the result of the sin. Now, you can see already that if we can feel the pain and suffering to a degree, then it means that we're already becoming conscious. If we're properly educated, we're already becoming conscious that we've sinned. Because pain and suffering, if pain and suffering is the result of sin, then it tells us that, okay, I'm having pain, so therefore I must have sinned some way, right? So it's a feedback system, if you think about it, of letting you know or informing you about your sin. And then you've got what happens after pain and suffering. Well, once the pain and suffering is recognised, realised, you could say this process is a process of becoming aware. Now, aware is good. Aware of the sin. So we need to develop an awareness that we're not upholding God's standard of love. And one way that we develop an awareness individually is we start, if we can be sensitive to the pain and suffering we're in, we go, there's areas here that I need to change either my spiritual beliefs, my emotional feelings, my sexual feelings, or my physical actions. I need to change something there so that I no longer sin and therefore don't have pain and suffering as a result of that sin. Now, another thing that's important to also understand, and these are also things that can come from the pain and suffering, is you can either develop a desire to correct your behaviour. So it's like, I've done something wrong, I recognise I did something wrong in terms of broken the standard of love. I took some bad actions, I had some pain and suffering as a result. Then I realised pain and suffering means I sinned. Where did I sin? And I start to feel, not just think, but actually feel where I sinned. And as a result of now feeling the sin, I then develop a desire within myself to correct it. So it's like, let's say I was a violent, abusive man towards women. Let's say in the past I've even physically hit women and so forth. Let's say I was an abusive husband, in the past. My wife left me. That's a part of my pain and suffering. She'd probably leave, wouldn't she? If she had any love of self, she would definitely leave. And not only that, the people around me would be, you're quite an abusive man. They'd be not wanting to spend a lot of time with me. That's another part of my pain and suffering. But also, on top of that, my conscience, if I become sensitive, will start bothering me. And that's going to be the biggest pain and suffering, because it start getting onto you all the time and start bothering you all the time. And in the process of that, I'm becoming aware that I sinned, that I did something wrong, and it was wrong for me to do that thing. Now, if I become truly aware and I really feel motivated to correct it, that's what I'll feel to do, to take actions, whether they're spiritual, emotional, sexual or physical actions we need to take to correct my behaviour, right? And I'll do that not because I'm forced by anyone else, but because I want to myself. Right? That's the goal. God's goal is that you're not forced by somebody else to fix the problem, but rather you want to fix the problem yourself. Right? That's the goal. Right? And you think about that, if you had a child and the child was unruly, the nicest thing the child could ever do is fix its own problem, isn't it? In terms of work out why it's wanting to be unruly, work through the issues, come to the conclusion that it needs to change, and then take action to change. Now, that would be a very loving process if the child decided to do that, rather than you having, as a parent, restrict its behaviour all the time or control it in some way so that it doesn't continue to do the bad thing. Obviously, the best possible thing is that the child voluntarily goes through the action of correction, right? So God's goal with you is that you voluntarily go through the action of correction. And also part of becoming aware is you also want to repair the damage of what you did. So let's say you were this angry man who harmed his wife, she left and everything. You would want to repair the damage. You'd want to go, wow, I really harmed her life. I destroyed her self-confidence. I destroyed many other things, obviously the family itself, by my actions. And you'd want to take actions to repair that. Now, your ex-wife might not want to let you do that with her, but you would want to take actions that would help other things. So you might end up, for example, working, providing services to help abused women. That might be one of the actions you might take to repair the damage of your own behaviour. Makes sense? Now, this correction and reparation process is called compensation. That's the term we've given it, compensation. The process of recognising you've sinned, seeing that there's pain and suffering involved, wanting then to correct your behaviour and wanting to repair the damage of your behaviour. That's compensation. Now, you can do that without God. So if you don't believe in God, you can do it without God, or you can do it with God. Right? If you do it with God, you're going to have to involve a third process, which is a very important process called repentance. Right? And that process there's laws involving that process, which are separate to and have a higher hierarchy than the laws involving those processes. So the repentance process is what you would do with God, or you do, and you still go through correction and reparation, but because of repentance, you're going to go through it much faster. Or you will have to, if you're not repentant, you will be asked by the law to correct your behaviour eventually. And a lot of times when a person's not repentant, they are sort of, the law grinds them into submission. Like it's just every day sort of a memory of what you did wrong. Every day you realise you have to take some action. Every day. And because you don't really want to, the law's going to keep grinding, getting you to the point where you want to. That's the purpose of the law. And the same goes with the process of repairing it. A lot of people, they feel they've fixed the problem internally, but they don't take any action to actually repair the damage they've done in the past, right? Now, the law is going to require that at some point in the future, that you do repair the damage of the past, right? And you can see why, because if you choose to correct your own behaviour so you don't do it anymore, you really still haven't fixed what you did, right? All you've done is you've just corrected your future behaviour, but your past behaviour is still really not addressed, And so reparation is a very important part of the compensation process. Now, that is the topic I want to discuss with you the next 2 days, or 5 days if you're going to come to Dammer and Hammer as well. And the way we're going to discuss it is really simple. I'm not going to say anything unless you've asked a question. Right? So what we're going to do probably now is we might just have a little break so you can go to the toilet and whatever else. Think about some questions. Right? And if there's no hands up, then we're all going home. As simple as that. Right?
Now, Joe, just before you do
Break,
that,
yep.
yes, there's a couple other points I know you wanted to mention here.
Yep.
Just with the awareness, just wanted to hit on the point about awakening, and that so really when we're saying awareness, first we might start with a sense of awareness, but in order for us to actually correct our sin, we must have an awakening to that sin.
Yep.
So that's different to an intellectual awareness. Awakening means, in my heart, in my feelings, I feel this is wrong. And unless I have that shift from my head-based awareness of, or maybe something's wrong, or intellectually it makes sense that's wrong, to my heart-based feeling of like, oh, something's wrong, there's a problem in me, not outside of me. Unless we do that, we're not really going to engage any of these processes of those bottom three blue options that Jesus has put there about correction and reparation and repentance. And so I'm just highlighting that because in our language, we're probably going to use the terms a little differently. Awareness is about when I'm sort of intellectually realizing something, I'm becoming aware. And I might even become aware of the emotions within me that are driving that, but I don't yet feel that it's a sin. I don't yet feel that it's missing the mark of love. And then when we talk about awakening, this is what we're talking about when, I feel it in me and I actually feel there's a problem, that it's wrong from God's perspective. So.
And the reason why this awakening is so important is that without it, you can't actually develop a relationship with God. So there's many people who hear that, I can have a relationship with God by just asking for God's love, and they start asking for God's love. And for a lot of people, they think they're asking, right? But firstly, there's not a lot of feeling in their asking, so it's more coming from their mind. Secondly, they have yet to awaken to the sin that's in them as to why God's love can't flow into their soul, even if they ask for it, right? So every time we ask God for God's love to flow into our soul, as long as it's sincere and in harmony with truth, we will receive love from God every time we ask. But unless we've had an awakening, we are generally not sincere, right? And we are generally not really going to ask because we're not sincere. So it's not a true desire coming from the heart to receive. It's only an intellectual idea at that point. So the biggest problem we see is that people who are trying to teach about receiving God's love, which is the main purpose as to why Mary and I go around the world teaching people, is that when it comes to this awakening process, most people are not awake with regard to their sin. And as a result of that, there's a lot of what you would classify as insincere emotions as to why they're asking for God's love. And of course, if there's insincere emotions, then it means we can't receive. There's nothing, God's not going to give us love when we're insincere. The reality is love can only flow when we're in a state of truth. And one of the sub-aspects of truth is sincerity, honesty, openness, transparency. And so if we are not transparent with ourselves, with the way in which we're sinning, then of course we are not honest, and therefore we are not sincere, and therefore love can't flow. The Holy Spirit is a conduit that gets established between God and yourself, and through that conduit the love comes. But that that conduit cannot connect to your soul unless you're in a state of truth, unless you're in a state of sincerity, unless you're in a state of transparency and honesty. And with yourself, not with everybody else, but also with everyone else, but primarily with yourself. It's the lack of self-awareness, the lack of self-honesty, the lack of the self not awakening that causes these problems. And so we can talk about receiving God's love, but unless you go through this awakening process, you're not actually going to experience it. And if you don't experience it, it's going to be hard to believe it actually happens until you actually go through a personal experience. It doesn't matter how much somebody else explains to you that it works, until you actually go through the experience of your own personal experience, you're not going to really believe it, and therefore not really going to engage the process. And what we find is that most people don't go through the experience because of this awakening process not happening, an awakening to their own problems or sin and what the cause of it, which is not upholding God's standard of love, not having a desire to uphold God's standard of love. So,
Yeah. You could say that our desire is to help you understand how to receive God's love and also how to love others. But most times on earth, we don't really understand what love is, and we don't understand where we're missing the mark of love. So these next 5 days is really about trying to help anyone who wants to participate, how they can understand God's laws more and therefore understand their sin more, so that hopefully you can commence that relationship with God sincerely for yourself and begin to love other people as well.
Yeah. So we want to sort of focus our conversation with you now on three, you could say, three primary topics. Firstly, the topic of God's law and how that upholds God's version of love. So what is God's version of love versus human versions of love? And then what about this sin thing? What is that? How do we sin in these different areas? So this is where we'd like to focus your questions, right? So that we can have a conversation about those things. So what I'm going to do actually is we'll flick over the board and we'll keep referring back to this just to keep you on track in regard to the questions. Because obviously it's these subjects we feel when we visit, and we visit like tens of thousands of people, and we see these general patterns which come up, which is the biggest area where everybody struggles is recognising their own sin. And in fact, when sometimes people say, "Can you give us feedback?" And that's a lot of times what that means is, "Can you tell me something nice about myself?" Generally, that's what that means. And of course, there's many things nice about you, but it's not the nice things that are stopping your relationship with God. It's the things that are not nice that are stopping your relationship with God, right? So we of course want to share with you, well, here's the areas where you're not so nice, right? The trouble with that is for most people, they go, "Don't tell me that I'm not so nice. I want to know that I'm nice. I want to know that I'm great. I want to know that, you should tell me good things about me." And a lot of times even their relationships have been established on the same basis, like, as long as my partner tells me nice things about me, then I'm good with her. But as soon as she starts telling me things about me that I don't want to hear, I don't like her anymore, And a lot of people feel that way about their friends, their partner, and of course about Mary and I. But our goal is to help you have at least the first experience of receiving God's love. Once you start having that experience, you'll recognise its benefits. And once you recognise its benefits, you'll probably, most likely, want to continue having that experience, right? But having that experience requires some sense of understanding yourself in terms of understanding where I'm sinning and why I do it and what's going on and what causes me to do it. And even more fundamental things such as what is God's version of love and how does that compare to my version of what I believe love to be. Even just understanding some basic principles of is my concept of love even accurate or true or real from God's perspective? Or is it just all a figment of my creation, my own creations? So this is where we would like to focus attention with regard to our discussions. Probably we're going to do that the rest of our trip, to be honest. But we'll see how we go with you guys here in England. And then our next port of call is Ireland. And then after that, Canada and the US, and who knows, we might finish up having to have 10 weeks discussion about it rather than 5-day discussion. But we'll see how that goes. So that's what we want to be our focus for the next couple of days. So, time to have just a short break so you can go to the toilet and stuff, and get yourself comfortable, get out your pens and paper, work out some questions.